Hello, everyone, and welcome to the AgCulture Podcast, where we share insights about the future of agriculture. Each week, we dive into the stories, technology, and ideas shaping a sustainable and profitable future for farms and rural communities alike. I'm Paul Windemuller, host of the AgCulture Podcast, and on today's episode, we have an in-person interview with Alan Bonthuis, who is the Senior Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Harvest Solar. We'll be discussing some of the challenges that agriculture faces with solar and some of the opportunities that solar presents for farmers and those in rural communities. Now, I know renewable and solar energy sources can be a controversial topic sometimes, especially when it comes to land use discussions around those renewable energy sources and how that affects farmers in a community. So we're going to be talking about some of that and how it can provide opportunities for farm operations. Now, I encourage you to go into this with an open mind and just listen to what Alan has to say. I know I learned a few things about energy and solar through the conversation that I had with Alan, so I hope you learn a few things as well. Take a listen to this episode with Alan Bonthuis. Well, today in my very humble studio here in my dairy farm office, I have the pleasure of hosting Alan Bonthuis, who is the Vice President of Sales and Marketing for a company called Harvest Solar, based here in Michigan, right?
Right.
Well, thanks for coming out to the farm today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Looking forward to our conversation. This could be a little bit of a controversial topic in agriculture, and I think it's a conversation that needs to be had. To look at from different aspects, how solar can be used for good and some challenges that the solar industry is facing, right?
Sure. Like anything, we've got opposing viewpoints, and I think it's so important to go through all of those and understand it's not even two sides.
Right.
This is 3, 4, 5-sided discussion. So,
Yep.
Yeah.
And understand the context around it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I have a lot of discussions in my role, partially because of my position. So I am been in solar, but only for the last couple of years.
Yep.
I also grew up and still live on a farm and have gone through, so I understand that side of it. But also work quite a bit with political, because of the issues around solar, the politics. So I sit at kind of a nexus where I start to hear. I don't always understand its opinion. But I start to hear different sides of the argument. So,
yep. So let's start out. Obviously, you just gave us a little bit of your background, but what drew you to get into solar and as a person with an agricultural background in a space where there was some controversy?
Yeah. Well, you're probably going to hear this from me more than once, but my reasonings for going into solar as an occupation, a lot like people's reasons for installing solar, it was about the money. Can I be that frank?
Yep.
Yeah, it is growing so rapidly, and there's so much opportunity in the renewable space, and particularly solar, where we live in Michigan, that when I was kind of at a point where I was looking for what's my final occupation going to be, what am I going to ride through to retirement? And that's what I chose, but it was not an easy decision to make.
Yep.
And I talked to a lot of people beforehand, gathered a lot of information. It took about 4 months for them to convince me to come on board. And if I were to ask myself 3 years ago, or tell myself 3 years ago that I would be in this field now, I probably wouldn't believe it myself.
Yep. One thing I just wanted to bring up before we get much deeper is I am putting in a solar array at my farm here, my dairy farm here in Michigan. We decided to put it as a roof-mounted system, and we were able to get some grant money to do the project. And I really looked at it from the standpoint of, hey, I've been watching my electrical costs, my utility costs go up quite substantially over the last few years, and this is a good way to fix a large portion of that over the long run. What are some other reasons that you've seen in agriculture people decide to put solar in?
When I say a majority, it's probably closer to 95 or more percentage. The reason they put it in is for green energy, and not the green energy that we think about environmentally, but the green energy, the green money. It's a financial decision.
Yeah.
Over 95% of the time, it's a financial decision. There are some, larger corporations that are trying to hit sustainability check boxes, that type of thing, but they're still looking for the right tool that is economical and satisfies those check boxes.
Okay.
The incentives, the reduction in electrical costs. I mean, that's what people are looking for. That's what they're drawn to it in the first place.
Yep. And do you want to explain here in Michigan, at least, how the system works with creating electricity on farm and how that works with the utility?
Yeah. So
it's very different from state to state and from country to country.
State to state and country to country can be very different. We work primarily in Michigan and Illinois. Even though we're close neighbors, it's still very different even between Michigan and Illinois. But most states run what they're called a distributed generation system. So you're able to build privately owned solar on your property up to a certain level. And in Michigan, it's 110% of your previous 12 months consumption. Okay, so you are limited to how much you can put under the distributed generation system.
Mm-hmm.
You'll interconnect that with the grid using whatever electricity you produce first, and any electricity that you're producing that you can't use will get pushed back to the grid. So our systems don't have any batteries. There's no way to store that electricity. So essentially, we're using the grid as our battery, selling it to the utility, and then buying it back later in the evening and on bad weather days.
Okay. And then over the course of that month that they bill you for, then it kind of is offset.
It offsets, exactly. Yep. You'll have your largest offset is during those sunny days when you're not buying electricity, and then your secondary is those wholesale credits that you can apply towards the retail purchase.
Okay. And as I've traveled around the world the last year, I've seen, that's one question that I had going from country to country when I saw a solar system set up on a farm, asking them how that works with their local utility, because it's really interesting to see how many types of agreements and arrangements there are.
Right. Yeah. Michigan wasn't that long ago, and we were incentivizing solar, and we were actually paying more than retail. Are getting paid more than retail, and a lot of solar projects that you see that are 10 plus years old, none of that's being used on the business because
it's all being sold on the grid.
It was better to sell it to the grid and buy back what you needed.
Yeah.
You get into states like Illinois, they'll let you go to 200%. Up until January 1st of this year, they were net metered, so there was no dollar exchange. I sent the grid a kilowatt. I used the kilowatt later. We were even.
Mm-hmm.
So now they've gotten rid of net metering in Illinois, so they're more similar to what we do in Michigan now.
Okay. Now, one of the big controversies that's out there with solar, obviously, there's two different types of systems that you usually see on a farm. Which one of them, which I'm doing, is obviously a roof-mounted system. Mm-hmm. Doesn't take up any extra land. The one that really seems to be causing a lot of controversy is the ground mount systems, right? Yeah, right. So why would somebody decide to go to a ground mount system? And then what are really some of the details around the controversy around that?
Well, if I could back up just a little bit, Paul, we've got more than just the two. We've got distributed generation systems, roof and ground mount, like your situation, right? Where you can put a certain amount of solar on your land, use the electricity, and sell back the rest. That's what you see on residential, people's homes, that type of thing. But we can't confuse it with the utility scale and the community solar projects that are out there.
Right.
So the distributed generation system like yours is never going to use acres and acres of land. Right. Where a utility project, the one that's rumored to be coming into Michigan next, is 6,000 acres in one county.
Wow.
So those are utility scale. They're not in the same decision. Those are all being sold to the grid. Those are often owned by utility. So back to your question, why would I at a dairy make that decision whether it's roof or ground? We don't mind either. Sometimes it comes to the economic decision. If I build rooftop in under our current National Electric Code, I've got to have rapid shutdown, which is an expensive piece of equipment. So sometimes it's just that easy. I could put it roof or ground. I want to avoid rapid shutdown. If I'm on the roof, I'm stuck at the angle and the azimuth of the building, right? If I go on the ground, I can control that angle, the direction that the array points, and have a little bit maybe better production because of it.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing we don't like to build on, especially animal barns that have poor ventilation and older roofs, we're putting a system on that's going to last 30 years.
Yeah.
So if you don't have a roof that's going to last 30 years, then we make the decision. And in hog barns and poultry barns, we tend to stay away from for that reason. We do put on a lot of dairies and a lot of newer dairy buildings, but I would recommend not putting it on a 25-year-old dairy building.
Right.
That type of thing. So, yeah.
Understanding the useful life of that building and what it's going to be used for long term before you make that investment.
Exactly.
What are the biggest long-term advantages that you see for a farmer to invest in a solar array?
Sure. The best thing about solar or electricity generated from solar is that on the day you install it, you lock in the price of electricity for the next 30 years. We have very little control in agriculture, as over our input costs and our market rate. But here is something you can control: an operating cost, whatever percentage of electricity that you lock in, that is locked in for the next 30 years plus, right? So it's about lowering your costs. However you look at it, it goes back to that financial sustainability.
Yeah. Now, what are some challenges that farmers should probably be aware of when looking at investing in one of these systems, other than, if they're looking at putting it on a roof, the age of the barn and what it's used for?
Not every situation is the same. And I think that's the most important thing to realize. You really need to work with a reputable company that can analyze your utility rates, your utility policies, what your facility is. Again, going back to that roof situation, we don't want to put it on a roof that's going to fail in the next 30 years or likely to fail. Space is always a concern, but and utility policies, like I mentioned, but having somebody reputable that can go through and identify all those incentives correctly and get you a proper internal rate of return, IRR, is probably the most important thing.
Okay. Now, going back to some of the land use concerns that people have in rural communities, what are potential benefits that could come out of putting in a large-scale system? Like offering it to a commercial,
like
there's a lot
utility.
of commercial buyers coming through and saying, hey, we'll pay you a really big amount for your land or rent it from you for a really big amount every year.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the positives that might come out of that?
Sure. So I'm going to answer the question in two different types of systems. First, the smaller of those systems, called community solar. They tend to be 2 to 7 megawatts. These are 10 acres to up to 40 acre systems. Very common in states outside of Michigan, although we have some community solar bills that can hit our lawmakers every year. Those are privately owned, really directly benefit the community because they only can supply electricity to a geographical area. So if your town decided to put in or allow a community solar project, you would sell electricity to your community at a rate less than what the utility could, right? And then as the landowner, developer, whether that's the farmer or somebody else they're working with, they take that. There's still a delta, right, between what it costs me to generate and what I sell it at. So that's the advantage for them. In that case, you do have multiple wins. On the utility side, that's a direct transaction. The utility is going to generate power and sell it to you. And we get a lot of talk about that makes their electricity costs higher, which frankly there's not much truth to that. Solar is the cheapest way to generate electricity. I think that the thing that we miss often, though, is that solar is one type of development that is easily removable, right? It's something that if we put in 100 acres of solar and use it for 30 years, we can easily clean that up and return it to farmland. Unlike any other kind of development, you build housing, you build commercial there, it's never going to go back to farmland. Right. So I think essentially then we're taking advantage of that now on the community level and potentially rebuilding that soil, because anything under the panels is essentially in a conservation program at that point.
Mm-hmm. What do most projects do that are, that larger scale if they're ground mounting, and what do they do in between the panels? Is it just a grass that they're going to mow, or is it some projects that you've seen that have been trying to rebuild the soil while they're in solar and do different things like that?
So we're usually seeing either native grasses and pollinator plants being put in there. We've got a couple of now fairly large farms in Michigan that graze sheep under utility size panels.
Okay.
So the one I'm thinking of in the southwest corner is hundreds of sheep, and they move system to system is a way for them to, supply their feed to their sheep by moving them from solar to solar.
Yeah.
But the agrivoltaics, which is what I think a lot of people wish we saw, we don't get a lot of that. We don't get a lot of people that are doing inter-row cropping, that type of thing, at least here. You do in other parts of the world, other parts of the country. And I think that's, again, coming down to a matter of economics. We make so much money on an acre potentially there's so much money involved in an acre of solar. They don't need to supplement the income. And if it's not easy, they don't do it. Right.
So they're not incentivized to do it.
They're not incentivized to do it. So it's easier for them to just keep people out of it. I don't have equipment moving around the solar module, the array. I don't have animals around the array. I don't really need the additional income, so they just don't do it.
Yep. On the grazing point that you made, I was in Australia about a month ago, and there was a 3,000 acre utility scale solar array that I saw, and the farmer that I was with there was telling me his neighbor that grazes sheep on that property. He used to own it, sold it to the utility, and as part of the stipulation of the sale, he's got for the rest of his life grazing rights.
Okay.
And most people probably listen to this from Australia know how dry it can get in Australia, and it was really interesting because of the shade that the solar panels provided. He actually, I think he said he either doubled or tripled his grass growth because the evaporation rate of the water was much less. So the grass had a lot more moisture to utilize to be able to grow. So he actually increased his stocking rate of sheep on that land that he got paid really good money for, and had the right to use it long term. So that was kind of an interesting story.
Yeah, you like to hear about the wins, right?
Yeah.
I spoke with a farmer last December from Massachusetts, and he had utility solar come into his property. Part of the negotiations and part of the policy in Massachusetts with agrivoltaics was he was able to specify that he wanted it to be a certain height off the ground.
Okay.
And that he wanted to be able to still farm underneath it. And he was growing broccoli and getting almost the same yields of broccoli that he was pre-solar.
Interesting.
Because they weren't that plant. I'm not a broccoli expert, but from what he said, that was not affected as much by direct sunlight.
Okay. Interesting. One of the other challenges that you hear come up with the commercial scale size solar operations is when they come in an area and say, hey, we'll give you X amount per acre land rent for the next 30 years. With a lot of farmers are worried about that driving up their land rents and the accessibility for them to expand their farming operations if it's not their own land that's going to be in the system.
Yeah, well, and it absolutely does drive up rents. We've seen rents here in Michigan that are 7-8x what our cash rents are for crops.
Right. Right.
And
That scares people really quick, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, when we talked about those multi-sided arguments. I understand it from the side of the renter, or from the tenant, and how it's affecting him. But also, I've got a landowner that had a choice, right? And we wouldn't want to take away our choice on how we used our land, right? And we've got a lot of farmers that have used that lease of a percentage of their farm ground to really supplement and allow them to continue farming the rest of the ground. And like I said, it's just multifaceted. You want to go to it from a pure economic standpoint, which God, we hate to do, but if they can afford to pay more, then they should be able to pay more, right? And there's no easy answer,
right?
Yeah, but what you said is true. If I've got somebody in my area that's paying 7-8x what I can afford to pay for cash rents, it's going to drive up everything. Yeah. And you're going to have land that's not available to you.
Now, you said in your role now, you're getting involved a little bit more in the political side of things, just to understand that better. And what are some of the, at least in Michigan, the area that you're working in, some of the political issues that have come up around solar that you've seen is getting dealt with currently?
Yeah. So we're talking specifically about Michigan, and we'll talk about Michigan for the last 10 years. I mean, there's been a real push for us on the community side, because we are locally zoned, right, and locally controlled how we use our land, to really just say no to solar. And so in the political world, and I don't think it's going to change with the new administration. We saw the state step in and say, if you will not on the township level allow solar, we're going to take that responsibility away from you. So in November of 23, they passed a law in Michigan that says zoning no longer has any authority to stop solar of around 500 acres or more from coming into your township. So that's a huge political hot button. Not only did we maybe trample a little bit on our rights there, but that not in my backyard mentality came back and bit us a little bit. We could have at some point before that, as a state, decided maybe we are going to adapt some more local energy, because that's what it is, right? A lot of times we get the same people not in my backyard mentality. If you want to put a coal plant behind your house, or if you wanted to put a prison or a hog farm, or you need a nuclear plant, right? Yeah. Did I say that like Bush? Nuclear? Whatever it is that not in my backyard, but we all need and we all use electricity.
Yeah. So what do you think would be some viable solutions to some of those political hot button? I'll put you on the spot here.
Yeah, right. You want me to solve what the rest of us couldn't solve? And
right.
Okay. I just need 5 seconds to think about it. I'll come up with a solution. No, we have seen some communities that do it really well. Community solar, what we don't want to have happen to us, we're pushing to have happen to somebody else. What we don't want solar in our backyard. Energy is going to get produced somewhere, and it's going to affect somebody.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. We always need it, right?
We're going to have trade off, right? Yep. I mean, one of the statistics that, in as best as I can tell, factual, is Department of Energy says 1.3 million acres of active permitted coal plants in the U.S. right now. Right. That's a lot of ground. Mm-hmm. Solar is going to take 15 or 16 million in total to replace coal as an electrical source.
Okay.
So, is it true that we're going to need a lot of land? Not necessarily need to be farmland. Are we going to need a lot of space for solar? It's true. Are we using a lot of space for energy now? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Right. 34 million acres of corn every year is grown for ethanol. That's energy. So we're already using ground to produce energy.
Just in a different form.
It's just a different form.
Yeah.
And we're harvesting the sun already. Talk about I get hit with efficiency all the time, because when people hear that solar panels are only 23% efficient, which is pretty run of the mill right now, Well, they say, well, I'm not going to do that until it's more efficient. I said, well, don't grow corn because corn only uses 1% of the sun. So if you want to talk about solar efficiency, make sure you're thinking of that.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, we're in Michigan, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're sitting right now in West Michigan. I'm putting a solar array up in a place where we, about 2 to 3 months out of the year, measure the sunlight in minutes per month, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So how does that work, and how is that efficient and makes sense to actually put an array in because of that in those areas versus absolutely. Arizona or Texas, where they might get sunshine for most of the year around?
Yep. Well, we can get into a real deep science discussion, and I'm happy to, but I'm going to hit on the basics. You can ask me if you need more. Okay. So when we look at the solar access in West Michigan, we get about 1,300 hours annually, which doesn't seem like a lot. Orlando, Florida gets 1,550. You get out into areas of Phoenix, they're pushing and over top of 2,000. Okay. So when you look just strictly at those efficiencies, Michigan doesn't make as much sense. We have a couple other things that make Michigan unique. Number one, it's cold here. These are semiconductors that generate electricity. They like to be cold.
Okay. Versus Phoenix.
The
summertime.
Yeah. And so you see areas of Arizona, California, New Mexico, where we often say this is where solar belongs, where during the time of day when they need energy the most, solar shuts down.
Because it gets overheated.
It's too hot.
Okay.
Right?
Interesting.
So we have that advantage in Michigan. The other advantage for solar, but big disadvantage for us, is our electrical prices are high.
Yeah.
So every kilowatt hour that we generate here, even if we generated half of the kilowatts of another area, if our electrical price is twice as much, the benefit washes out.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, that's one thing that I've always wondered a lot is how that works with how little sunlight we get parts of the year. And that's a really interesting explanation about the heat sink, and that
heat and cold
really can cause the issue as much as
heat and cold cause an issue. The other thing that people don't often understand is we don't need that direct sunlight. I've looked at a lot of solar arrays on clouded, overcast days when they're still generating electricity, and that may not be 100%, but they're still generating electricity. Yeah. High clouds tend to focus photons, which the photons are what really we use to make electricity. Low clouds tend to dissipate photons and have a negative effect. But we've had during the winter solstice, December, I was at a fruit packer not far from here, full overcast, snowing, and his system was still producing a third of what it was rated at.
Okay. Awesome. Now, there's technology advancements in pretty much every sector. This one has had a lot of focus on it over probably the last 5 or 10 years. What technology is coming out in the near future, or new things that have come out that are really improving solar or making it more interesting to put in?
So I want to, again, I'm always going to back up on you, Paul.
That's all right.
What I do, right?
Got to have context.
Yeah.
Right?
So that one thing is the history of solar. A lot of people, especially my age, you get your weekly reader in school, and we talked about solar like it was brand new in the 1970s. And it wasn't. The first solar installations went into New York City in the 1890s. Now, they didn't even understand what they were doing, but they knew that if they hit sun on a certain material, it generated electricity. It wasn't until 1921, or actually 1905, when Einstein figured out how the photovoltaic effect worked. 1921 was when he got his Nobel Prize for it. Okay. So we look at solar like it's some new technology that came out of nowhere. It's been around longer than the diesel engine.
Yeah.
Right. But it's true. We've made huge advances since the first commercial solar cells in the 60s. And those were the ones that were made to go on the satellites and go into space. And that's where they found a first commercial application for these, what were at the time very expensive. The biggest advancement we've made in photovoltaics, especially over the last 10 years, is the ability to manufacture them at a large scale, right? And when you're able to manufacture them at a large scale, prices start to come down, and they've come down tremendously in 10 years, which is why all of a sudden solar is the cheapest way to generate electricity.
Okay.
And when you get better at manufacturing, we really don't have a large focus on making them more efficient, other than getting better at manufacturing. Because as we're here talking about space and land, the rest of the world looks at it from an economic equation and says, it's cheaper for me to use twice as many panels than to try to increase the efficiency by 2x.
Okay.
So there's not a big push to make solar panels more efficient. Now, the technology in inverters and energy storage, those things have come a long ways in 5 years. Smart inverters now that really can control the flow of energy, whether it's time to store it, whether it's time to use it, whether it's time to divert it to another source. That those softwares and technology have come a long way.
Okay. Now, I know you've hit on it a little bit, but could you describe how solar compares to all the other renewable energy sources out there?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, from a cost perspective, whether you're looking at utility scale, residential solar, distributed generation, utility scale solar, wind, onshore wind, offshore wind, how they classify it, geothermal being the top 6 renewable pockets that they look at. Hydro
maybe not as much in the U.S., but some other
hydro is not being installed new,
right?
So they don't do price comparisons any longer on the cost of electricity from hydro.
Okay.
So the reference that I use is Lazard. Lazard is a financial consultant, asset manager, and they publish annually the levelized cost of electricity. And so those are the ones from a cost perspective that tell us onshore wind and solar in 2024 came darn close to being equal and the cheapest way to generate electricity. Coal's 3x of that, right? Offshore wind is almost 3x of that. So geothermal is almost 3x of that. Nuclear is 5x of that because of the cost and the runway that you need. I mean, it's a 20-year permitting process and a very expensive plant. Mm-hmm. So another reason why we're not seeing a big push to put in new nuclear, not seeing a big push to put in new coal. Why our local utilities have been putting in solar even before it was regulated that they had to put in renewables because it was cheap.
Okay.
Right. Wind, you and I are from a state where we see a lot of wind.
Yeah, you can hear it outside probably right now.
but we have a lot of windmills in certain pockets of our state, but we're by no means a state that has a large amount of wind compared to other states as a renewable energy source. But that's moving parts. It's a lot of maintenance. It's heavy foundations. When a windmill goes down, we don't even remove the whole thing.
Yeah.
Right. You go down 10 feet, leave everything that's below that. So unlike solar, where everything can come out of the ground easily.
Okay.
Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
I can't remember what the question was anymore. So.
Well, just how it compares, how solar compares to the other renewables. So
yeah.
I think you did a good job answering that.
Okay.
So do you see solar as maybe a stepping stone to get us to a different future of energy, or do you think solar will be around as a major contributor to our energy systems for the long term?
I am not one that says solar is the solution. Solar is not even a full part of the solution now. We can't run our electrical needs on solar. It takes a variety of different energy sources now to satisfy what we need, right? Coal is a great base. Natural gas and solar and hydro are great peaker demand supplies. So it takes a village of energy to keep things going. Now, what is it going to mean in the future? I think we're at baby steps right now on solar.
Okay.
It's when you look at the photon, it's a cheap, free, constant energy source. But is it going to be the same thing we see now with large photovoltaic these big rectangular panels? I doubt it. I think we're going to see a lot more building integrated photovoltaics in the future. Those costs got to come down. We're going to see a lot more energy storage, on-site energy storage, or distributed energy storage. in another reason why I like solar now, that we can remove it 30 years from now, is likely it's going to be a much smaller piece of the footprint 30 years from now than it is in the next decade.
And the installations will probably look very different at that point.
Oh, absolutely. Already, we're seeing completely different installations than we did just 5 years ago.
Okay. In what ways?
So we're going from pitched panels now to more vertical panels. They're getting a lot more compact. So our power compaction, how much power we can put in a space is much higher. We're relying less on the ability to get all of that efficiency out of every panel, and saying, man, if we put more panels in a space and can store the energy when it's right, we'll produce more per square foot or whatever area. It's kind of the same thing. One of my favorite agrivoltaic examples are vertical panels, and you see these quite a bit in Northern Europe. In photos is where they all seem to come from the Netherlands and Denmark, that area. But they're putting in vertical panels spaced 33 feet apart, where they can run a triple wing mower down. Now those panels are not going to generate as much electricity as a compact tilted panel field, but you can get a pretty good amount of electricity off of it, and you lose very little bit of the land.
Yeah.
Right. And we're seeing greenhouses now with transparent photovoltaics or photovoltaics that are just a small piece because greenhouses need shade at certain times of the year too. So they're kind of building in a hybrid panel that's clear with photovoltaics.
That's interesting.
And we've got here in West Michigan, we've got a lot of greenhouse, what we call under glass, a lot of acres under glass.
Right.
It's
already been built on.
Every one of those could be a power generator, at least for their own consumption, or maybe even export.
Yeah, interesting. So in the U.S., there's a lot of programs, some subsidies, some grant funding out there available for putting in solar, especially on farm.
Right.
What are your thoughts around that?
So my thoughts are almost everything we use from a public good is subsidized. And I think we need to be honest with ourselves on where the subsidies come from. Right now, we've got about 12% of our electricity is coming from renewable sources in the U.S. as an average. And Michigan happens to fall right in line with that average. We're just a hair under 15%. Okay. And renewables as a whole, with the IRA, let's talk about the IRA. If you're from the U.S., you understand what that is. The Inflation Reduction Act set aside $20 billion for renewables, the development of, the installation of renewables. $2 billion was the USDA REAP grant, right? And that was a 10-year program is what that was spread out for. Now, we used a lot of that money quicker than 10 years, but that's how it was set out. So if you break that down, $2 billion a year for 10 years, call it $20 billion over 2 years, which is about how we ended up spending it, or $20 billion over 3 years, which is about how we ended up spending it. We did install a lot of renewables. That same time period, fossil fuels in the U.S. by the U.S. federal government were subsidized $22 billion a year. So it's hard for me. I want us to stand on our own.
Yeah.
I want fossil fuels to stand on their own. Probably there's always going to be this incentive thing.
Yeah.
Right? Whether it's jobs or infrastructure, federal dollars are going to flow somewhere. Right? As a farmer, and I care about our rural environments, I would like to see that money come to us. Right?
Versus the Exxons
versus some Texas oil field or wherever it's going. But yeah, it's we often don't look at, because we only ever hear the side of the story that we're on. Right. $2 billion a year for solar. That's a lot of renewables. I mean, that's a huge subsidy, but we can't avoid the fact that 11x of that went to fossil fuels in the same time period.
Yeah. You don't ever hear about that. Right. Yeah. One, I think the point you made about ethanol is interesting too. So 34 million acres roughly of corn last year went to produce ethanol.
Right.
And obviously those acres, especially think it was released this week, the amount of dollars that will be given out to farmers that had cropping acres this past year. There's a lot of subsidies that go into corn.
Yeah, and I'm not here to make a moral judgment about the subsidies one way or another. My point is just that if we're going to talk about subsidies, we need to talk about it as a whole.
Yeah, across the board for all the energy sources, pretty much every aspect of energy is getting subsidies in some way or form or fashion in the U.S.
And we need energy, and we need food, and we need those public goods that So like I said, I'm not here to make a moral judgment about it. I just think we need to be honest with ourselves that it's not just renewables, or it's not just corn, or Yeah. So to kind of answer the rest of the question, I think about as far as incentives, there's a lot of incentives that help pay for solar. So we talk about the 6 ways you pay for solar. Every state is a little bit different. Energy savings is the one that we all come here for, right? That's when we start looking at solar. We want to be able to lower our electricity bill. As an investment, buying equipment, which it is, you still take depreciation. You get tax credits, which are unique investment tax credit for solar. So that's an incentive that's included in that number that we were talking about.
Yep.
And we all, in all energy sectors, also gets different tax credits. We had the USDA REAP grant, which is still in effect, but it's going to be modified and probably back to what it was prior to 3 years ago. But still a great incentive to install solar. We have the sale of SRACs, so those solar renewable energy credits, which in Michigan don't have much value. Other states, and you've got a bigger audience, so I'll talk about SRACs. The sale of SRACs can make up 40 or 50 or 60% of the cost of your solar project. So those are valuable. Rebates, they call them rebates, but it's a utility essentially buying the rights to control your equipment, which is happening in Illinois right now.
Okay.
Yeah, you install a battery, they pay you a rebate, which is essentially them saying in the future, if we ever have to control your battery, we've just bought the right to do it.
Okay.
But all those things combined, those 6 different ways, can make solar pretty attractive.
Yep. Now I got one more rabbit trail that I'd like to go down. One thing that you hear a lot about in the U.S. over the last probably 20 years is our aging distribution infrastructure for electricity. How does solar play into that? Is it good? Is it bad? Does it help at all?
So I'll give you the real world what you might be seeing, Paul, and then we'll explain why, and that'll back it all into the whole thing.
Yep.
Right. So in where we're at, we might see a utility come to us and say, "I'll give you $1,200 an acre to lease your property," or I might talk to my neighbor who was offered $2,500. Right. So why is there such a disparity in those areas on how much? Most of it goes back to infrastructure. So because of the ability of solar to put it anywhere and still have it work effectively, not have to have a big infrastructure supporting it of rail cars and labor and that type of thing, we can put it on the demand side of a substation. So a substation that is not big enough or needs a major upgrade because of the draw of energy on the demand side. If we put solar on the demand side, that can push off or eliminate the need to do that substation upgrade. Okay. So that's the reason why somebody's offered $1,200 and the next guy's offered $2,500.
They might be on that.
They might be on the demand side of a substation that needs an upgrade. And by paying you a little bit, but it's a lot, but to them, a little bit extra in rent can avoid a multi-million-dollar upgrade to that substation.
Okay. That's interesting.
Yeah. So
it can help with the infrastructure challenge.
It can help with the infrastructure for sure, because it's distributed. It's a distributed generation system. We're not trying to make electricity in one plant and send it for hundreds of miles in all directions.
Yeah.
Right. So we don't need as big a transmission lines. We don't need as big a central system. It doesn't solve all the problems. We do have an aging electrical infrastructure, and in Michigan is one of the worst.
Yeah. Stuff still needs to get replaced at some point.
Still needs to get replaced at some point. But this is the way that often utilities are using solar to push off those infrastructures or infrastructure improvements or eliminate them in some cases.
Okay. That makes sense. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here today, Alan. I appreciate you shedding some light on this topic. Again, it can be controversial in some ways, but I think it's more important to understand the context of the situations, understanding the benefits that an opportunity like solar can provide to a community, to the electrical infrastructure, and to a farming operation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's been a joy. I really enjoyed talking to you about it. And, the one thing that I see, and like I said, I come from different perspectives, is that we don't understand the other viewpoint. And by doing that, we'll be better off to make our arguments for sure. So
definitely. Now, how can people find out more about you, more about what you do?
Well, you can reach out to me easiest through our website at harvestsolar.com. You find my contact information on there in my bio. I'm on social media. I've got our strange last name, Bonthuis. So if you search Alan Bonthuis, you're sure to find me. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, again, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, thank you again for listening to another episode of the AgCulture Podcast. Hope you enjoyed today's episode with Alan Bonthuis from Harvest Solar and the discussion that we had about solar energy and how it can affect agriculture in a positive way, and the challenges that we also face in agriculture as well. Please feel free to reach out to Alan. He's a great guy to talk to, wealth of knowledge, and would love to hear from you. So check out our show notes. We'll have that information in there for you to connect with him. And as always, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with somebody that you know. That's how we grow our audience. So until next week, I'm Paul Windemuller, and this has been the AgCulture Podcast. Thanks so much for listening.